The flute of champagne in my hand is colder than I expected for an indoor event. I keep turning it, watching the bubbles rise and disappear, because it gives me something to do with my fingers while I wait. The ballroom at the Hartwell Hotel is beautiful tonight. White floral arrangements on every table, soft lighting that makes everyone look kinder than they are, a string quartet in the corner playing something I almost recognize. My mother planned every detail herself, the way she always does, and it shows. She has always been exceptional at creating beautiful surfaces. She's at the podium now, holding a note card she doesn't need because she memorized this speech weeks ago. I know because she called my brother to read it aloud to him over the phone, and he told me about it in passing the way he tells me most things as a footnote, an afterthought, something mentioned while he's already moving on to something else. 60 years, my mother says into the microphone, and the room quiets instantly. She has always had that effect. 60 years, and I look around this room tonight and I think I did something right. Applause. My father catches my eye from across the room and gives me a small smile. I smile back. I reach up and touch the edge of my lapel pin, the one I wear every day without thinking about it now. The small gold seal that means something specific in the world I inhabit, but nothing at all in this ballroom, in this family, in this particular room, full of people who love my mother, and have been told, in one way or another, who her children are. My son, Marcus, she begins, and the room shifts warmly, heads turning toward my brother, who is standing near the bar with the ease of a man who is expected to be looked at his entire life. Marcus built something from nothing. Anyone in this room who has driven through the Kellerman district in the last 5 years has seen his work. 3 residential towers. A mixed-use development that won a city design award. He took a neighborhood that everyone else gave up on, and he made it into something people want to live in. She pauses for effect. I brag about him to strangers. I can't help it. Laughter. Marcus raises his glass. He is handsome and comfortable, and he accepts admiration the way a plant accepts sunlight naturally, without effort, as though it were simply the correct order of things. My younger daughter, Claire, my mother continues, and my sister waves from a table near the front where she's sitting with her husband and their 2-year-old, who is miraculously asleep against her shoulder. Claire gave me my first grandchild. She runs her own interior design firm, and somehow also manages to be the kind of mother I only dreamed of being at her age. She makes everything look effortless. Another pause, which, as anyone who knows her will tell you, is actually the result of an enormous amount of effort. She just doesn't let you see it. I admire that more than I can say. My mother glances down at her note card. 1 beat. 2. And my older daughter is also here tonight. She works in law. The sentence lands, and then the room moves on. My mother already pivoting toward a story about my father, and I stand there holding my champagne, and I think, 28 years. That's how long I've been waiting for something different. I was 9 years old when I told my mother I wanted to be a judge. Not a lawyer, a judge. I had seen a documentary about Sandra Day O'Connor on the small television in our living room, and something had locked into place in my chest, the way things lock into place when you're 9 and the world suddenly shows you a shape you recognize. I told my mother at dinner that night. She was serving pot roast and she said, "That's a long road, sweetheart," and handed me the butter, and the conversation moved on to Marcus's soccer tournament and Claire's spring recital, and I stored the moment away in the careful mental filing system I had already begun building at 9 years old, the one where I kept the things that mattered to me and that I would pursue regardless. I never stopped. That's the part of this story that still surprises me when I sit with it. Not that my family underestimated me. Families underestimate quiet children all the time, especially quiet girls who read too much and don't perform their ambitions loudly, but that it never once made me smaller. I think some children shrink. I understand why. The absence of recognition from the people whose recognition is supposed to matter most is a particular kind of cold, and some people spend decades trying to get warm by standing in that specific light, contorting themselves into shapes their families might finally applaud. I went the other direction. I went inward and forward at the same time. I graduated at the top of my class from a school my mother consistently described to her friends as a good state school, which it was, though it was also significantly harder to get into than she understood and produced. In the year I attended, 4 Rhodes Scholars. I applied to law school and got into 3 of the top 5 programs in the country. I chose the one with the strongest constitutional law faculty and the best federal court placement record because I had known since I was 9 what I was building toward. and I did not deviate. My mother came to my law school graduation. She drove 4 hours with my father and Claire, and Marcus called to say he couldn't make it because of a permitting issue on one of his developments. She hugged me at the reception after and said, "You must be exhausted. All that studying." She said it warmly. She meant it as a compliment. That's what made it so difficult. She was never cruel. She was simply incapable of seeing the dimension of what I was doing, the way someone without musical training can hear a symphony and experience it as pleasant noise without ever understanding the architecture beneath. I clerked for a federal appellate judge for 2 years. I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office and spent 7 years as a federal prosecutor, trying cases that occasionally made the news and more often didn't, building a record that my colleagues understood and that existed, for my family, as an abstraction, something with the government. My mother told people at her book club, very demanding, lots of long hours. 14 months ago, the governor nominated me to fill a vacancy on the federal district bench. I was 32. The confirmation process took 6 months. I was confirmed by a margin that surprised even the people who supported my nomination. I became, at the time of my swearing in, the youngest sitting federal district judge in the history of this state, and the first woman of color to hold this specific seat. My mother sent flowers to my chambers. The card said, "So proud of you. Love, Mom." She did not attend the swearing-in ceremony. She had a long-standing commitment to the hospital board fundraiser that weekend, which she had mentioned when I called to give her the date, and I had told her it was fine, which it was, in the sense that I had stopped needing her to be there somewhere around the 3rd year of law school, but I kept the card. It's in the same drawer where I keep the letter from my law school dean and the note from my former supervising judge that I have read approximately 40 times over the years. I keep things that feel, in some small way, like they tried. The party goes on around me the way parties do. I find my father at the bar and we stand together for a while, talking about nothing, which is how my father and I have always communicated best side by side, in proximity, not demanding anything of each other. "She worked hard on tonight," he says. "It shows," I say. "It's beautiful." He nods. He knows what I'm not saying. He has always known what I'm not saying, my father, which is perhaps why he's never said it either. We stand in our mutual understanding and drink our drinks, and I think about the drive home, 4 hours in the dark, back to the city, back to my apartment and my case files and my Tuesday morning docket. Marcus finds me an hour later, already loosened by the open bar. "She means well," he says, without preamble, which means he heard it too, the way it was said, the absence at the center of it. "I know she does," I say. "She just doesn't." He stops, presses his mouth together. Marcus is not an unkind person. He has simply lived his entire life in a particular quality of light that makes it difficult to understand what it's like to stand in the dark. "She doesn't really get it," he finishes. "No, I agree. She doesn't." He hugs me, which surprises me. Marcus is not a hugger and I let him, because it's genuine, and because sometimes the gesture matters more than the fluency. He goes back to the bar. I stand near the edge of the room and look at my mother, who is laughing with her closest friend near the flower arrangement that anchors the center table, and I feel something I've felt before and learned to sit with, the specific loneliness of being seen incorrectly by people who love you. I'm reaching for my coat when the woman approaches me. I don't know her at first. She's in her late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a dark blazer, and the particular expression of someone who has spent a long time in rooms that required composure. She's been watching me for a few minutes. I realize I clocked her peripherally but didn't process it. She stops in front of me and says, "You're Judge Reyes." The name lands differently here than it does in my courtroom. Here it's a discovery. In my courtroom it's simply a fact. "I am," I say. "I thought so." She extends her hand. "I'm Beverly Hartman. I served with your grandmother on the hospital board, years ago. I know your mother socially." She pauses. "I didn't know her daughter was a federal judge." "She doesn't mention it much," I say. "I followed your confirmation," she says. "The constitutional questions in the briefings were remarkable. Your record in the U.S. Attorney's Office, particularly the racketeering prosecutions, the one 3 years ago, was exceptional. I was still on the appellate bench when your appeal came through on the evidentiary issue. The brief was one of the best I'd seen in years." She pauses again, and there is something careful and deliberate in how she's watching me. "I didn't realize until just now that you were Eleanor Reyes's daughter." Judge Beverly Hartman. The name reorganizes in my memory. Chief Judge of the State Court of Appeals, retired 18 months ago after 22 years, known for opinions that get cited in law school casebooks. One of the women I had read about at 26 when I was building the internal map of the path I intended to walk. I am, I say again. She nods slowly. There is a specific look on her face, composed, but underneath the composure, something that might be the judicial equivalent of indignation. Does your mother know, she says, very evenly, that you are the youngest federal district judge in the history of this state? She knows I work in law, I say. The silence between us is brief and precise. Would you mind, she says, if I said something? I look at her. This woman, this judge, this person who has spent decades in rooms that required composure, asking me permission for something, and the unexpectedness of it catches me off guard. What do you mean? I ask. To the room, she says simply. I don't stop her. I should probably explain why, because it's the question I've turned over in the months since. Not whether it was right, but whether I would make the same choice again, and the answer I keep arriving at is yes. Not because I needed the room to know. I had stopped needing rooms to know a long time ago, but because there was something honest about it, something that finally refused the long pretense that everything was fine, that she works in law was sufficient, that the gap between what I had built and what my family saw was something I should continue to maintain alone, quietly, without making anyone uncomfortable. I nodded. Judge Hartman set her glass on a nearby table and walked to the podium with the unhurried precision of someone who has spent decades commanding rooms. She didn't reach for the microphone dramatically. She simply rested her hand on the edge of the podium and waited. And within 30 seconds the room was quiet. Because that is what happens when certain people decide a room should be quiet. I want to add something to this celebration, if I may, she said. Her voice was conversational, easy. The voice of someone who has never needed volume to be heard. Eleanor, you spoke beautifully tonight about your children, about Marcus and his work, and about Claire and hers. She paused. I want to say a few words about your other daughter. My mother's expression shifted. Something uncertain moved across it. I am Beverly Hartman, she continued. Some of you may know me from the Court of Appeals, where I served as chief judge for 8 of my 22 years on the bench. I've spent most of my professional life in federal courtrooms, reading briefs, reviewing records, watching lawyers and judges at work. She looked across the room and found me. 3 years ago, a brief came across my desk in connection with an appeal from a federal racketeering prosecution. It was the finest piece of legal writing I'd reviewed in over a decade. The argument was airtight, the constitutional analysis was sophisticated, and the evidentiary reasoning showed a mind that understood not just the law, but the weight of it. She paused. That brief was written by the prosecutor who is standing in the back of this room tonight. I felt the room turn. 60, 70 people, and all of them turning toward me, and I stood there with my coat over my arm and I did not move. When that prosecutor was nominated to the federal district bench 14 months ago, Judge Hartman continued. I wrote a letter in support of her confirmation. She was confirmed. She took the oath of office at 32 years old. Another pause, deliberate and unhurried. She is currently the youngest sitting federal district judge in the history of this state. She is the first woman of color to hold her seat, and her name is not my older daughter who works in law. She looked at my mother, not unkindly, just clearly. Her name is Judge Reyes. And Eleanor, you have raised someone extraordinary. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then my father started clapping. I don't think I can fully describe what happened in the 30 seconds after that, because I was not watching the room, I was watching my mother, and what I saw on her face was something I had never seen there before. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly, though there was some of that. It was more like the expression of someone who has been handed a map and realized, looking at it, that they have been trying to navigate a landscape they fundamentally misunderstood. She looked at me from across the room, and I looked back at her, and something passed between us that was too large and too old for the setting but had nowhere else to go. Marcus was the first person to reach me. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once, said nothing, which was more than enough. Claire made her way across the room with her sleeping daughter still on her shoulder, moving carefully, and she hugged me with her free arm and said quietly into my ear, I'm sorry I never said it louder, which broke something open in me that I immediately closed back up because this was not the place. My mother came to me last. The room had started moving again, by then conversations resuming, the string quartet picking back up, and she crossed the ballroom with the careful walk of someone navigating uncertain terrain, and she stopped in front of me and she looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About the youngest. She stopped. Started again. "I knew you were a judge. I knew it was federal. I didn't understand what that meant." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about this for a moment, about the 7 years I had been a federal prosecutor and the number of times I had offered information and watched it slide off conversations the way water slides off surfaces that aren't ready to absorb it, about the swearing-in ceremony she hadn't attended, and the flowers she'd sent, and the card I'd kept, about the 9-year-old who had watched a documentary and understood with animal certainty what she was meant to do, and the 40-year-old at the podium who had never once asked what her quiet daughter was building. "I did tell you," I said. "A lot of times, in a lot of ways." She absorbed this. My mother is not a stupid woman, she is, in her own domain, extremely capable, and I watched her absorb it and not argue, which was itself something. "I'm sorry," she said. And then, more quietly, "I didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand." This was probably the most honest thing my mother had said to me in 32 years. I stood with it for a moment before I answered. "You could have tried to understand it," I said. "I would have explained it, any time you asked." She nodded. Her eyes were bright, and I could see her working not to cry. Because my mother does not cry in public, it is, I think, the rule she has always been most committed to upholding. "Can I?" she asked. "Now?" I looked at her. This woman who made a beautiful surface out of everything, who planned tonight down to the last flower arrangement, who sent me a card instead of coming to the ceremony, who said she works in law, as though describing a paralegal, who loved me in the imprecise and partial way that some parents love the children they cannot quite see. "Yes," I said, "you can, but I need you to know something first." She waited. "I didn't build any of this for tonight," I said. "I didn't build it hoping you would eventually figure out what it was. I built it because I knew what it was, because I knew what I was doing, and I knew it mattered, whether or not anyone at this table ever understood that." I paused. What happened tonight was I looked across the room to where Judge Hartman was talking with my father, the two of them deep in conversation. That was something else, but it didn't change anything that I knew about myself. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" My mother looked at me for a long moment. "You didn't need us," she said. "No," I said. "I didn't need you, but I wanted you. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to stop confusing them." She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was tighter than I expected. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what you do. Tell me what the cases mean. Tell me how it works." She squeezed. "I want to understand. I should have wanted to understand a long time ago, and I didn't, and I am sorry, and I am asking now." I stayed that night. I hadn't planned to. My overnight bag was in my car on the off chance, old habit from years of last-minute family obligations, but I had mentally drawn a clear line under the evening and planned to drive back to the city regardless of the hour. Instead, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table at 11:30 at night while the catering staff quietly cleared the ballroom, drinking tea with my mother. I explained federal jurisdiction. I explained the difference between trial courts and appellate courts, and why the district court level is where facts are made and why that matters enormously. I explained what it means to clerk for a federal judge, and what I learned in those 2 years, and what it felt like to sit on the other side of the bench for the first time. I explained the racketeering case, the one Judge Hartman had mentioned, and what was at stake in the evidentiary question, and why the brief had to be written the way it was. My mother listened. This is the part that stays with me most from that night. She listened, the way a person listens when they know they are receiving something they have no way of returning, and the only honest response is to receive it fully. She asked questions. A few of them were basic, and a few of them were sharper than I expected, because she is smart, my mother, when she is paying attention. At one point she said, "The Sandra Day O'Connor documentary." I looked at her. "You watched it on the TV in the living room," she said. "You were little, 8, maybe 9. She turned her cup in her hands. "You came to dinner afterward and you said you wanted to be a judge, and I said it was a long road." She paused. "I thought I was being practical." "I know you did," I said. I should have said something like, "Tell me more about that." "Yes," I said. "You should have. We sat with this." "I'm telling you now," I said. She looked up at me. "I'm telling you now," I said again. "That's what tonight is, if you want it. Not an apology I need, not a repair of something that can't be repaired. Just, I'm here, and you're asking, and I'm telling you. I paused. That's something. Yes, she said, very quietly. That's something. I drove home the next morning. My mother walked me to my car in the early light and hugged me for longer than she usually does, which is its own kind of language, imprecise and trying and real. My father appeared at the kitchen door in his robe and raised his coffee cup in my direction. I raised mine back. We have always understood each other at a distance. 2 weeks later, my mother called me on a Tuesday, not her usual Sunday call time. A Tuesday, which was different, and said she had been reading about a case I'd handled 2 years ago that had made the news in passing, a housing discrimination suit that she'd found through an article, and she wanted to know if I could explain the constitutional question. I sat in my office with case files open on my desk, and I explained the Fair Housing Act and how it intersects with equal protection doctrine, and she asked 3 follow-up questions, and I answered all of them, and when we hung up, I sat for a moment before I picked up my pen again. I am not going to tell you that everything changed. Some things changed and some things will never change, because there is a version of being known that has a window, and my mother's window opened in my 9th year and closed again before I could fully pass through it, and no amount of kitchen table tea at midnight can fully reconstruct what was behind it. I know that. I've known it for years, in the way that you know certain things not as a wound anymore but as a fact, the way you know the weather of a particular season and you dress accordingly. But she calls on Tuesdays now. That's real. She asks questions and waits for the answers. And sometimes she asks me to explain something again in a different way, and I do. She came to my courtroom last month just to observe public proceedings. She sat in the gallery for 2 hours while I ran a scheduling conference and a motion hearing, and afterward she stood in the hallway outside, and when I came through the door in my robe, she had an expression on her face that I had never seen there before. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You're very calm." "You have to be," I said. "You were always calm," she said, almost to herself. "I always thought that meant you didn't need anything." I considered this. "Calm doesn't mean not needing," I said. "It means having found a way to go forward regardless." She nodded slowly, the way she's been nodding lately when I say things like she's filing them somewhere new, a folder she opened late but is filling carefully. I don't know what the next years look like. I know what my docket looks like for the next 4 months, which is something. I know there is a case coming up with constitutional implications I find genuinely interesting, and I will do the work I always do, careful, thorough, aware of the weight of it. I know that when I sit on the bench and the courtroom rises, I feel, still, the thing I felt at 9 years old watching that documentary, that this is the shape I recognized, and I walked toward it, and I arrived. I know that Beverly Hartman sent me a note 2 weeks after the party. It was handwritten on plain paper, 3 sentences. It said she hoped she hadn't overstepped. It said she had spent a career in rooms that required her to name things precisely, and what she saw that night required naming. It said that the law was lucky to have me. I put it in the drawer, next to the others. I am not a person who needs to be told who she is, but I am a person who keeps the things that tried. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to learn it, and now that I have, I find it clarifying the way all true things are clarifying, like a window you've cleaned so many times your whole life, that one day you simply stop noticing the glass and see straight through to what was always on the other side.